Thank you, Teresa, so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
You were actually there when I first recorded my very first podcast, but on the other side, watching our then newborn baby.
No, I can't believe it's been that long.
Do you mind giving a little introduction to yourself, and especially as it relates to your experiences in media?
Yeah, sure. So I am a writer based out of L.A. By day, I am a contributing writer at a website called The Mary Sue, which is a kind of intersectional feminist pop culture website. So we write a lot about nerdy pop culture stuff. I've been a freelance writer for over a decade at this point, writing for various sites, usually in that pop culture space. But then I am also a screenwriter, and I am pursuing a career in television. So a lot of my other writing experience on the fiction side has been television scripts.
You've also done a lot of caregiving yourself, so I'm really excited to hear perspectives. And the first one really being, why do you think it's important for families to be proactive when they're talking about the media they're consuming?
Oh, absolutely. It's so funny. Even through my writing and stuff, I feel very close to my childhood self. A lot of what I write stems from just remembering what it feels like to be a kid and applying that. And in addition to the freelance writing, I've been a nanny and a babysitter for many people, yourself included. And it gives me a chance to notice families in their natural habitat and like how they talk to their kids about things, like the kinds of TV they watch, the kinds of movies they watch, all of that. And I get to see kids absorbing that away from their parents. And it reminds me very much of myself. Like being a kid can feel very big and very lonely. And you feel like there's so much you don't know. The world is very big and there's so much going on, and you are a small person trying to learn everything there is to learn. And very often parents, in the interest of protecting their kids, sometimes shelter big things from their kids. They're like, okay, you don't need to know that now. You don't need to know about that now because you're too little or whatever. But we'll continue to think about it, even when their parents have put a stop to the conversation. And so it's important that, to me, just remembering what it was like to be a kid and feeling like I needed to know everything, that, kids are absorbing everything we're absorbing. They're seeing the same TV. Even if they're not watching it, they'll pass by the TV and see an image. They will be outside and see a poster. They will whatever. They're absorbing the same world we are. And it's important for parents to provide context for kids when they see things, because otherwise a kid will just spiral. And we all know that kids are very imaginative. They have very vivid inner lives, many of them. And if parents don't give them the context they need, they'll create their own. And that's not always a great thing for a kid.
We always joke that we let them ask why until there's just nothing left that we can tell them. It was probably way too late in life before I realized that documentaries had opinions and were very not often objective and are created by a person. So I'm curious, going back to like our 80s and 90s, if you think kids and young people would understand that more or understand that less.
I think they would understand that more now, because we live in a world where everybody's a content creator to a certain extent. So many kids that I've dealt with, they play YouTube host. Like they pretend that they're doing unboxings. They'll just be playing around the same way that I used to play school or pretend to be a teacher or whatever in my bedroom. They're in there hosting in their mirror. So when I was babysitting these two brothers, they were big fans of the remake of the Thundercats show. And I thought I was going to be so cool. A friend of mine had DVDs of the original Thundercats show. And I brought it over and I was like, let me show you the Thundercats that was on when I was a kid. And they had all these story questions. They were like, why are they traveling on this spaceship? Why are the cats naked? Where are they going? Why are they doing what they're doing? They were so savvy about story because the cartoons that they grew up with actually have structure and actually have like backstory. And wow, the stuff we watched as children was really just a toy commercial. Like it had no substance. So interesting to me that kids now do have more access to behind the scenes. When I was a kid, I didn't know that people made TV, because unless you went out and bought like magazines about it or specifically sought that out,
I've seen that. I see that so often now. They'll often want to watch a movie just because they saw people talking about it on YouTube, or they'll say something and I'm like, I don't think you've seen that show. Is that your opinion or is that someone else's opinion? And then they circle back. But how do you think that might affect how they're looking at a website or they're looking at a site that they'll read?
Yeah, it's tricky because on the one hand, they are like children now have never known life without the internet, right? Like they've never known life without a tablet, without access to a phone, without all of that. But at the same time, they're still susceptible the way adults are still susceptible to the algorithm. Like they're still susceptible to all of the things that corporate sites do on purpose to manipulate our emotions. And I say manipulate, and like marketing and advertising has always been about manipulation, right? That's not new. Like you're trying to get people to buy a product. You're using certain words, certain images to get people to take an action, to do a thing. And that's not, on its face, that's not always bad, right? That's the point. If you're marketing a good product that you believe in, yeah, you want more people to buy this thing or try this experience. As savvy anyone might be, I'm in the industry. I create content for the internet for a living. I'm susceptible. I find myself responding to headlines, knowing fully how they are produced and whatever, but I will angry react to something. I will suddenly find myself commenting where I have no business commenting because something just inspired something in me. So yeah, that's kids do it the same thing and they might think they know. And because they're younger, they don't have the experience or the context to see that's what they're doing. And that's the thing that they're missing. Because I'm an adult and I know I'm being manipulated. And I know when it happens, I'm like, I'm recognizing that is happening.
It's so take us behind the scenes a little bit. You mentioned how headlines are created. I know as a writer that I don't always get final say on my headlines.
Yeah. I only have experience with the sites that I've written for, but many of them have been corporate sites. Some of them are just started by people. It's a different vibe. But the sites that I have worked for where there's a bigger company that owns it and maybe owns several other sites, it's a different model. It's a different set of needs that they have because they are beholden to shareholders. They're beholden to advertisers. And yeah, so let's say any article that I write, right? Like I have a take. There's a show I want to write about. There's a particular thing I want to dissect or analyze and what have you. First of all, when I pitch a story, the concept itself, whatever my take is, needs to lend itself to a headline that is grabbing. So it's not enough that I have like a nuanced take on a thing. Like that's not interesting enough. It's okay, but how can you distill that into a headline that makes people want to click on it? So that's the first thing. And then very often those headlines feel like clickbait. And they're not clickbait because clickbait, the real meaning of clickbait is you click on the thing, oh, you won't believe blah, blah, blah. And then it's totally misleading you in another direction and has nothing to do with what the headline is.
Yeah.
It's not that disingenuous, but there is a certain element of we want to leave the big part out of the headline to make you want to find out what it is. So recently I did an article about age gaps in between Bridgerton's actors and their characters. And the headline, and I had to ask for help for the headline that we went with was Bridgerton has an age gap problem, but not in the way you think. And so it's, oh, what's the way you think? And it's one of those things where then sometimes I've had it happen where we'll agree on a headline in advance, talking about it like that. But then I will submit my article for publication. And then when it's published, the headline is totally different anyway. And because an editor or somebody decided this headline could be punchier. But I know that years ago, I've had experiences where people will, because all they have are the byline of the person who wrote it. Like they don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So people will read something with a headline that is very grabbing, sometimes very inflammatory, and they will come for the writer because that's the only person they have access to. They'll email you and they'll be like, or they'll say stuff in the comments where it's like, I can't believe you, blah, blah, blah. But then the problem is that very often they haven't read the article. They've only read the headline and the first paragraph, which are the places where editors will make the most changes. People keep reading, but they'll just read the first part, not read the rest of the article that you put your nuance into and comment on that. And the reason they do this with the headlines is obviously they want clicks because they want clicks on the ads on the page. Very often this is for that model of website. That's why more and more our websites are trying to do subscription models, but those aren't working very well because nobody wants to pay for anything. That's a different conversation. Nobody, sorry. Go ahead.
But that's a great example of why it's hard, like, to have nuance or more layers to a conversation than we can.
Yeah.
I found it interesting when I started seeing a shift where there was an SEO editor. And obviously, I know basics of SEO, but what is an SEO editor?
Yeah. Yeah. We have one of those. And yeah, the past couple of sites that I worked for have recently started employing those. So SEO, or search engine optimization, is when you will try to employ certain keyword in your article, specifically in your headline and that first paragraph. So we have a rule at our site where the first paragraph has to be 50 words, no more than 50 words. And we should try to include certain things in that first paragraph so that when you do a Google search, for example, that's often the part that gets highlighted. So the headline and the first paragraph with certain keywords. So whenever people look for a specific word, let's say I were writing about Bridgerton, let's just say. So it's like the words Bridgerton, Netflix, and like a character name should be somewhere in that opening. And especially if there's a specific topic, a keyword like sex scene or whatever, or if they're talking about Penelope and Colin getting it on, whatever keyword would relate to that, or whatever keyword would relate to anything to be there.
Sorry, that was our main keyword for their
scenes. Exactly. Oh yeah, because that was a big topic. Or weight, body image, or whatever, like for that specific example. But yeah, so then, but what that does, it forces articles into a shape that may or may not be natural depending on what you want to talk about. And that is a real skill, honestly. It's trying to make an article sound both interesting and nuanced and compelling to read all the way through, and have that SEO attention that makes people want to click on it in the first place. Because bottom line is you could have the most well thought out researched article in the world, but if nobody clicks on it, it's useless. So there is that. There is, okay, we can hate SEO all we want, but the fact is Google is out there Googling. And if we want to be read, we need to a certain extent, make our work amenable to the algorithm in order to get it seen.
Yeah, and it's interesting because we're getting much more SEO traffic, and it's so funny because sometimes I'll see an article that got a lot of hits, and I'm like, oh wait, that's from way back. What were they searching to get over there? And you can figure it out. But is SEO editor, do you think that is a new position, or are they just reframing what someone was already doing?
It definitely is a new position, only because that person needs to be very familiar with like Google or with other search engines, or they're looking for very specific things. They're looking for trends. I know that we've had trainings in using Google Analytics, and we are encouraged to look at Google Analytics. If we have a pitch for a story, put in some keywords into Google Analytics and see who's talking about that. How many people are talking about that? Have they been talking about that in the past hour? Have they been talking about that for the past week? And based on that, we know if it's a worthwhile pitch or not. Like, how in the conversation is your idea? And if your pitch is in the hotspot of Google Analytics, then it's like, yes, approved, go, write it. If it's not, then you might have to make more of a case for why you think it could be. So you can point to trends that are veering upward. It's not part of the conversation now, but I see that this might be where it's going, or this I feel like is going to hit the way that X, Y, or Z hit 2 weeks ago. Like, we're on the cusp of that. So then you have to make more of a decision based on what you think might happen with a trend.
Yes, let's jump now to more specific media. So I definitely want to take some time on these ads. Video, and this is from KQED. It will be in the sources, 10 of the most successful presidential campaign ads ever made.
It's morning again in America. Today, more men and women will go to work than ever before in our country's history. With interest rates at about half the record highs of 1980, nearly 2,000 families today will buy new homes, more than at any time in the past 4 years. This afternoon, 6,500 young men and women will be married. And with inflation at less than half of what it was just 4 years ago, they can look forward with confidence to the future. It's morning again in America. And under the leadership of President Reagan, our country is prouder and stronger and better. Why would we ever want to return to where we were less than 4 short years ago?
And what I notice is that they all do a similar thing, with the Reagan one actually being the most effective, in my opinion, in that it actually has a focus on him, as opposed to being an attack ad on somebody else, or being focused on something that has nothing to do with what will actually happen if he is president. I think the reason why, and it says in this article, the Reagan ad was effective, is because it's basically saying, under my presidency, we have all these good things. And it's appealing to that. Like, you feel safer, you feel better, you feel like you have options, all of this. So vote for me again. Because if you like that, and you didn't like what my predecessor did,
8 years.
Yeah, exactly. Like the course of action is clear. Whereas all the other ads are not about what I will do as your candidate, but they're about either how the other person is terrible, or they're about generic hope. It's not even about I should inspire hope in you, but hope is a thing. Don't you want to feel it?
As long as they don't read that Emily Dickinson poem.
Exactly.
That's fascinating, because hope was Obama's mantle, right? Yeah. So did that work, or did it not work, but we were all on board? Not all of us, but many of us were on board anyway.
Yeah, no, and I think, and there's a reason why people do that. And I think this is where the media literacy comes in. For me, especially, and I think you are the same in that you said, I love strategy like that. Like, we both kind of geek out about marketing and PR and how things are positioned. It is fascinating when people take what approach. I think that when Obama was running, we needed hope desperately. And I think the same could be said for Clinton. When Clinton was running, when I was in junior high at the time, but I think coming out of war, we're coming out of the Persian Gulf War, the economy was terrible. And he spoke to a blue collar kind of, we're all in it together, look at me playing the saxophone on Arsenio Hall thing that I think people needed. And so that's why the ad went that way. What is interesting, though, is that the Democratic candidates tend to appeal to that stuff, whereas Republican candidates tend to do more attack ads, which is interesting because I don't want to get too into a political thing, but it does seem like Democrats aren't willing to point out flaws for fear of seeming, we don't want to seem like that. We don't want to seem like them. So we're not going to do that kind of campaign.
What do you think is one of the first signals or flags for someone that they need to look at this ad more in depth, or explain, or how to explain why it's an attack ad to kids?
Yeah. Something that I've been wrestling with lately is the idea. What has become increasingly frustrating to me is that people will see something like an attack ad or even just a generic one about hope. And even that Reagan ad where look at how good things have been under my stewardship. But all of these ads rely on the average person not knowing much about how government works. It very often, people don't understand what the president has the power to do, where their power is limited. They might not understand that if we're talking about things like war, you need Congress. So it's not just the president is the commander in chief, but he can't unilaterally declare war. You need Congress for that.
I see. So you're saying like some of the topics they're bringing up, you can.
Yes. Yeah. So like a lot of the things that people will take credit for, that candidates will take credit for, has nothing to do with them. Or it has to do with them in their support, but also all of those senators and representatives that people very often don't pay attention to those elections. They don't like very often people don't pay attention to midterms. They don't pay attention to local elections. They don't. And all of those things feed into a lot of the bigger topics that when the presidential election rolls around, it's like it's often too late because you've already laid the groundwork for how things are going to go. And the president is the biggest kind of target. So people will either be mad at a president for how the country is going, or they'll be like, oh, this president is going to save us. And it had nothing to do with the president. It had to do with Congress and the House of Representatives passing laws, making decisions in those boring C-SPAN things that nobody ever watches because they're boring, because nobody wants to pay attention to how government works. They want to elect people to do that for them. But then it's very easy for an ad to play on that and for a candidate to be like, look at all the great things I did. And you didn't actually do that. You might have not vetoed something. Vetoed something. The buck stops with you, but the buck doesn't start with you. And there's a very long distance between the laws or the decisions that we may or may not be happy with and the president. But I think there's a lack of civic engagement in the United States that makes it very easy for an ad to infiltrate. And that goes outside of media literacy. That's civic literacy.
Typically, yeah. And we're getting into that as much as possible. But before we move on, I want to actually touch on what you were talking about and move into how influencers and social media personalities, how can we help kids, especially if we're not always there? You're there often when there are not parents there. What do you think are little signs, either in what the people are saying or maybe in what your kids are saying?
I think a lot of the time, something I notice is that, and because we are of a certain age and old and crotchety, we have a tendency, and every generation does this, I think, like you look at what young people are into and you're like, that's silly. When I was your age, I had better stuff and we were more whatever. And the truth is we weren't. It's just a different version of the same stuff. Every generation has their own stuff that they like. But I think it's important that rather than being like, oh, get off your phone and go outside. Oh, why are you spending so much time watching these videos or whatever? To try to approach kids with curiosity instead and be like, oh, hey, I noticed you watch a lot of these videos. Why? What's so cool about it? Like, why do you like it? Why is it fun? And you don't have to necessarily watch everything, but if you engage with a kid about stuff from the point of view of, oh, hey, like you seem to have a really good time with that. Why? I want to have fun. I want to think. Tell me. They might be more apt to share what they're into with you. And then you can, when you have the time, go off and watch a couple just to see, get the vibe. But this way it doesn't have to be like a big secret. And it shouldn't be this thing where, this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm Puerto Rican, growing up Latina, there's a big difference between the way Latina cultures have adults and children interacting versus the way like Anglo-American kids are brought up interacting with adults, in that there's like a more of a separation between like parents doing parent things and kids doing kid things. Whereas like when I would have birthday parties when I was very little, adults came. Like it wasn't just a kid's party. It was like a family party. And yeah, there were kids there, but there were also adults there and everybody expected to spend time with you. And it was a big mixed group. And I think that is every kid, every person needs their own space and their own stuff. And children are autonomous beings who deserve to have their own lives. But there doesn't need to be this separation between generations. And I think that if parents engaged with their kids, genuinely wanting to know, not just to be cool, in air quote, not just to for their own sense of, I'm still hip, I'm still trendy, but genuinely wanting to get to know your kid and see what they're into, you would then be able to better monitor in a way that's not monitoring, in a way that doesn't feel like you're the cops.
Exactly. And going back to something you said near the beginning of that, I distinctly remember hearing my uncle make fun of me for saying cool, and how I was like, great, now I won't say anything, or whatever reaction you want to have. And I hear myself doing that mock sometimes, and like, you have to cut that out because that's not going to help to tie a lot of different things together. What you were just describing as the open and curious relationship will not be created. Thank you, first of all. Just thank you so very much. There's so much more to talk about, and that's why
There is. I hope I said anything useful.
Well, you did. You said so many things useful. But now tell us where to find you. What are you up to? I know you have your newsletter, which I just re-upped to.
Yeah, oh, I saw that, and thank you. Actually, TikTok is at Teresa Jusino 711, which is my birthday. And my newsletter, it's just at the website for my production company, which is called Pomanock Entertainment. And the website is pomanockentertainment.com. I'm sure that'll be written somewhere. But there you'll see my newsletter, where I'll be offering fiction, video games, if I'm branching out into that space, various other bits of content that I hope people will enjoy. So if you want to help me make the production of that more sustainable, or if you just want to sign up for the free newsletter and keep tabs on some new, hopefully interesting to you projects that are in the pipeline, you can go ahead and check that out.